Tonight, the Prime Minister stands by his Chancellor after she admits breaking housing rules as new information is released which appears to shift the blame to her estate agents. Opposition parties have been calling for Rachel Reeves to lose her job after she failed to get a licence to rent out her London home. But is she now off the hook? The Conservatives tonight say she still has questions to answer. The Tory leader, Kemi Badenoch, has led the attack but faces questions about whether she broke the law by hacking into a Labour website when she was younger. Also tonight, the government tells Sky News it will investigate the challenge facing some carers as we hear from a mum who faces a nightly battle to keep her daughter alive with no help from the NHS.
Are you making this up as you go along?
Making what up?
Policies on the hoof.
As Reform UK look to make inroads in Scotland, we get exclusive access to the party's membership and hear their views on migrant deportation and Sharia law. And as Donald Trump gives his meeting with President Xi a 12 out of 10 rating, we look back at the best moments of Trump exaggeration. There are millions of them. All that and more with Gita Hari and Ava Evans, who will probably be the best panel we've ever had over the next hour. It's Thursday. I'm Jayne Secker, live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. Hello, good evening. We begin with breaking news on the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, who has spent the day facing calls for her resignation after admitting she failed to get a licence to let her London home. In the past hour, Number 10 has released new correspondence in which Ms Reeves' estate agent apologises for not applying for a licence on her behalf, as they said they would. The new details will relieve the pressure on the Chancellor, facing a huge political test in her budget next month. But it comes after another day of embarrassing headlines for the government. Despite the new information, the Conservatives have renewed their attack, saying that under the law, Reeves and her husband are responsible for ensuring the licence is granted. Our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, has tonight's first report.
You should do the right thing and sack Nadhim Zahawi.
No room for doubt from Rachel Reeves. If they broke the rules, they should go.
The Prime Minister doesn't even understand the rules that he is imposing on people.
Do the right thing and resign.
But now Rachel Reeves is holed up in the Treasury after she confessed she had failed to get the necessary permit for her South London home before renting it out. She had broken the law. A late-night exchange of letters, Number 10's attempt to shut this down. Writing to the Prime Minister, the Chancellor confessed this was an inadvertent mistake. As soon as it was brought to my attention, we took immediate action and have applied for the licence. This, enough for Keir Starmer, who replied, I am satisfied that this matter can be drawn to a close following your apology. 24 hours later, another letter to the Prime Minister, this time revealing the letting agents had promised to sort the paperwork. But an apology again too.
We're breaking into that story because we have some breaking news coming to us from Buckingham Palace. They have released a statement saying that His Majesty the King has today initiated a formal process to remove the style, titles and honours of Prince Andrew. Now, this, of course, comes after weeks and weeks of speculation and controversy about Prince Andrew. He relinquished most of his official titles just a week or so ago, but he has kept the title of Prince. We have a statement from Buckingham Palace that hopefully I can bring you in full. It says, His Majesty today initiated a formal process to remove the style, titles and honours of Prince Andrew. Prince Andrew will now be known as Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. His lease on Royal Lodge has to date provided him with legal protection to continue in residence. Formal notice has now been served to surrender the lease, and he will move to alternative private accommodation. These censures are deemed necessary notwithstanding the fact that he continues to deny the allegations against him. Their Majesties wish to make clear that their thoughts and utmost sympathies have been and will always remain with the victims and survivors of all forms of abuse. So let's just repeat that information that we've just got coming to us from Buckingham Palace, that they have now initiated a formal process to remove the style, titles and honours of Prince Andrew. So he's no longer going to be known as Prince Andrew. He will be known as Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. Now, there has been a huge amount of controversy over the Prince's accommodation, the fact that he is in Royal Lodge, that he lives there under a peppercorn rent arrangement. He did pay a large amount, some £7 million, at the very start of his lease, which has been used for repairs on the property. But going forwards, it is only a peppercorn rent. But we are now hearing that his lease on Royal Lodge has to date provided him with legal protection to continue in residence. But we now understand that the King has served formal notice to surrender the lease, and he is going to move to alternative private accommodation. These censures are deemed necessary, notwithstanding the fact he continues to deny the allegations against him, Buckingham Palace say. And they go on to say their Majesties, bringing in the King and the Queen, wish to make clear that their thoughts and utmost sympathies have been and will always remain with the victims and any survivors of any and all forms of abuse. I'm going to bring in our chief political correspondent, John Craig, who's with me here. Not what you were expecting to talk about when you sat down a couple of moments ago, John, but it's perhaps no surprise there's been a development given the level of controversy there's been over this for the last few weeks.
There are two issues here. One is the titles. The second is the Royal Lodge, his accommodation. Now, the titles, they talk there about a formal process. I would have thought that probably involve an Act of Parliament, some legislation in Parliament to strip him of those titles. That is my understanding. And the second point about the Royal Lodge, we learned this week that the MP who chairs the Public Accounts Committee, that's Sir Geoffrey Clifton-Brown, a Conservative, has written to the Crown Estates asking for a lot of details about the arrangements. That, obviously, when a committee writes to people asking for information, that means they're about to launch an inquiry based on the answers that they get. So I would have thought that this will have been discussed by the Prime Minister when he had his audience with the King this week. It was noticeable that the day after his last audience, or perhaps the one before with the King, there was the question in Prime Minister's questions from Sir Ed Davey, the Lib Dem leader, about some sort of a parliamentary inquiry into Prince Andrew's circumstances, and the Prime Minister said, yes, I'd welcome that. I would guess that there has been a conversation between the Prime Minister and the King at their weekly audience this week to set this in motion. I would have thought there are going to have to be some emergency legislation, I suppose we could call it, put through Parliament, both Houses of Parliament, of course, Commons and the Lords. And then, of course, there's the separate issue of his accommodation, and there are already moves in Parliament to challenge that, to look into that, and obviously where he ends up going. And, of course, that Sarah Ferguson, I mean, it's been reported that she's demanding new accommodation as well. So there's the two issues, really, titles and accommodation.
And John, talking about Sir Geoffrey Clifton-Brown, I mean, the idea that there could be a parliamentary select committee into Royal Lodge, it almost created the spectacle that potentially Prince Andrew could be called to give evidence about his leasing arrangements, which it was an extraordinary thought, wasn't it?
Potentially. I mean, the idea of a royal or former royal giving evidence to a parliamentary select committee, I'm not sure I recall that ever happening before. I mean, the Speaker and the House of Commons authorities and the government are always a bit reluctant about getting involved in royal matters. Having said that, I'm old enough to recall 1993, I think it was, when Charles and Diana separated, and the Prime Minister at the time, John Major, was making statements to the House of Commons about the arrangements. And I sat here a week or so ago and said that Unlike John Major, who was very involved in the breakup of that marriage and various royal arrangements, looking after William and Harry when they were younger, Sir Keir Starmer's not really had much to say or do, certainly in public. But I suspect that behind the scenes, he has had conversations with the King about what we might call the Prince Andrew problem. And it sounds as though things are moving. There's perhaps been a behind-the-scenes agreement between the Prime Minister and the King how they should proceed with this. As I say, almost certainly some legislation in Parliament to strip him of his titles, and the moves on the accommodation, well, the Parliamentary Committee, the Public Accounts Committee, the big spending watchdog in Parliament, is looking into that.
OK, thanks very much for that, John. Let's just remind you of the statement that we've just had in the last few moments from Buckingham Palace. Let me just reread it to you in full. Dropped just at 7 o'clock. It says a statement from Buckingham Palace. His Majesty has today initiated a formal process to remove the style, titles and honours of Prince Andrew. Prince Andrew will now be known as Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. His lease on the Royal Lodge has, to date, provided him with legal protection to continue in residence. Formal notice has now been served to surrender the lease, and he will move to alternative private accommodation. These censures are deemed necessary, notwithstanding the fact that he continues to deny the allegations against him. Their Majesties wish to make clear that their thoughts and utmost sympathies have been and remain with the victims and survivors of any and all forms of abuse. Well, let's bring in our panel who are with me now, Gita Hari and Ava Evans from Politics Joe. Also not expecting to be talking about this, but we got you, and you're all genned up on Rachel Reeves. But let's ask you, first of all, Gito, as somebody who was formerly inside Number 10, John was alluding to the fact that this probably will have featured in the King and the Prime Minister's conversations this week.
That's highly likely, and the conversation will have happened at a number of different levels: comms chief to comms chief, private secretary to private secretary. There would have been quite a lot of that. This is an amputation, essentially. This is the royal family belatedly, really, cutting Andrew loose and signalling in terms that others, I think, have been screaming out for weeks now, that this man cannot continue, and a little tinkering here and there, take away the odd title, doesn't work. There's been a sort of loud cry, I think, from the general public and from within the royal household, essentially saying, make him go away. And this is what they're doing now. It's going to be a formal process, strip him of his titles, he's going to be an ordinary citizen, and he's going to move out of a palace that nobody really thought he was being rightly punished for his associations, shall we say, when he continued to live in a great big palace and call himself a prince. This sounds like the message has finally landed.
Ava, what's your reaction to it? Do you think this is an appropriate response?
Good. I'm really pleased to see it, actually, and it's a shame that it took so long. I mean, I wonder, actually, if this is probably pressure from Prince William, who over the last couple of days, there was this release from the palace, actually, I think it was in the Sunday papers, about how Andrew would not be invited to his coronation, and arguably that might have precipitated, preceded King Charles's decision here. But, I mean, it's totally shameful. I mean, he might be the country's most expensive benefits grounder. I mean, why on earth is he living in a 30-bedroom lodge just outside London? No one in this country could even fathom dreaming of living in a place like that. But the taxpayer is paying for that. And you might make an argument that somehow the Crown Estate is naturally paying for it. At the end of the day, it's all of us who are actually funding his lifestyle. And, no friend of Jeffrey Epstein should actually be allowed any access to any taxpayer money.
Do you think that the royal family have been a little bit slow to act here? I mean, we saw, you mentioned William, and we saw at that funeral a few weeks ago, Andrew trying to talk to William outside, and William just frostily looking, eyes straight forward, not engaging. It was clear from the body language that he was furious.
Yeah, absolutely. They have been very, very slow. And this is actually really worrying, probably, for Prince William and Kate, because they've been trying to sort of reinvigorate their image and how they're perceived by younger people, particularly around millennials. They've been doing sort of interviews on BBC Radio 1 to make them seem more, ingratiated with people who are under 30, because there isn't the sort of monarchist, royalist feeling amongst that age category. And then you've got someone at the top here, his uncle, acting despicably. If they'd nipped this in the bud earlier on, then perhaps it wouldn't have been rolling news coverage for the past 2 years, and then the monarchy might stand a chance to continue.
Part of the problem, Gito, I think, for so many years was when the Queen was still alive, there was much made of the fact that Andrew was her favourite and that she, wanted to protect him. That protection went when she passed, but the royal family didn't act quickly, did they, after she went?
They didn't, and there was an excellent piece in the Sunday Times over the weekend just getting into all of that he'd always got away with it because she had a massive soft spot for him, which you understand as a mother, but as a monarch, that's kind of different. And they have been extremely slow on this occasion. I think there's been two problems. One is the associations, that as long as he is deemed to be acceptable with the rest of the gang, the rest of the firm, if you like, then it contaminates them. And so the whole monarchy, I think, has kind of taken a bit of a blow over the last couple of weeks. It's also made the king look impotent, because if you're king of any sort of domain and you cannot order your own brother to move out of your own palace, then what exactly are you there for? And I think it was all starting to get not just nasty, but almost farcical. And so at last, somebody's gone in, taken charge, taken a grip of the situation, and it looks like they are stemming the loss of blood tonight.
John, just coming back to you, I mean, the division between monarchy and politics and the state and parliament, it's always been kept separate. It's very unusual for politicians to tiptoe over what the royals should be doing. But do you sense that the pressure that we heard, the fact that it has been raised in the Commons and the fact that there is talk of a parliamentary committee, etc., has perhaps changed things?
Well, it looks like that parliamentary committee is now going to meet to discuss the financial arrangements of the Crown estates and so on. I was just thinking, actually, when we read that statement, titles plural, the Labour MP, or I think she's suspended at the moment, Rachel Maskell, the MP for York, has said that he should be stripped of the title of Duke of York. So it sounds as though that's now going to happen. She says that there's huge opposition to him keeping that title in the city of York. Now, in terms of parliamentary debate and so on, well, of course, it is the king, the monarch's parliament. It's the monarch opens parliament every day. Every now and again, we see when we're broadcasting in the central lobby, you see the documents being taken up to the House of Lords and so on, and bills getting royal assent and all that sort of stuff. So yes, I mean the monarchy has a role in Parliament. Now, of course, the Speaker would come down very heavily on any MP who overstepped the mark in criticising the monarchy. But I'm pretty sure that it will require some legislation, and I wouldn't be surprised if has to be a statement from the Prime Minister in the Commons on this. Probably on Monday. The House is sitting Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. There is a mini recess coming up. But clearly, that's said in that statement about stripping him of his titles must go before Parliament, I would have thought.
Unless there is another way that they've perhaps worked out that can be done. My correspondent Molly Malone has just joined us in the studio here. Molly, are you able to tell us anything else apart from this very basic statement?
Well, what we do know is that it seems to be happening at pace. It sounds like they feel that parliamentary time, it takes a long time to do what they'd want to do, and actually they feel potentially that, urgent national issues need to be addressed by Parliament, and actually they want to speed up the process. We know that, as we know, it's been weeks of mounting pressure and controversy surrounding Prince Andrew. We now know that two things have happened. One, he's set to leave Royal Lodge. We don't know the timescale for that. It's not immediately clear. They're essentially, we think, saying as soon as is practically possible and as soon as they can make arrangements for that to happen. I think I understand that Sarah Ferguson's arrangements will be separate to that. It'll be for her to make her own arrangements. And we also now know that he'll be known as Andrew Mountbatten of Windsor. We know he gave up his Duke of York title earlier in the month, saying that continued accusations about him distract from the work of His Majesty and the royal family. But this has been, as we know, continued pressure for him to leave his home over his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, the convicted paedophile. It's worth saying, of course, we know that he's long denied any wrongdoing.
Molly, thank you very much for that.
The government can rush through legislation quickly if they want to. We've seen it happen.
They can, but
things like all sorts of other things.
Indeed,
as well.
Let's bring in our royal correspondent Laura Badenoch, because she might be able to shed more light on all of this. Laura, what else are the palace saying? We've had this very official statement. I know that you will have spoken to them separately. Anything else you're able to tell us at all about what arrangements are now being made?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think first and foremost, it's clear that the king wanted to take decisive action about this. And that is exactly what we're seeing now. That pressure just hadn't gone away, even when Andrew, as we must now call him, decided that he was no longer going to use those titles. He still kept them. And I think that irked so many people, and his continued sort of lease connected to Royal Lodge. And I think the pressure wasn't going away. It was becoming too much of a distraction. It slightly overshadowed the king's very important trip to the Vatican last week. And of course, Prince William is due in Brazil for his Earthshot Prize next week as well. So I think this swift move is being taken now. Now, it's interesting how they're going about the removal of the title. So he is, of course, Prince Duke of York, and there are other various titles as well. What's happening now in terms of the removal of them is they're going to remove the Duke of York from the peerage role, which means that title can't be used officially. Now, there are a number of ways you can do this, but I think by doing it this way, it's not going to take up any time in Parliament and sort of take important parliamentary time away from other things that debates there and laws and things need to take up. So I think the king is using everything in his own power to remove this as a peerage. So I think in terms of the technicalities of it, and it's all kind of slightly strange titles and people who are involved in all of this. But the Lord Chancellor, basically, he's in charge of this role of the peerage, and the king is now sending royal warrants to the Lord Chancellor to get rid of the Dukedom of York. We understand that it was the king who started this process, but Andrew has not objected, and it's going to take effect from now. So he will no longer be Prince Andrew. We will simply be calling him Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. His daughters, though, because of the way their titles are given, remain princesses. And we now know, of course, this huge issue surrounding Royal Lodge, this enormous, vast estate on the Windsor estate that was tied up with a complicated lease anyway. That's now going, and Andrew, we understand, will be moving out as soon as possible, and will be moving to a property, we understand, on the King's private Sandringham estate. That's his estate in Norfolk, best known perhaps for the Christmas Day family gatherings. We're not being told at this stage which property it will be. It's a large estate there in Norfolk, but that's where he'll be going. And any future accommodation for Andrew is going to be privately funded by the king. As for his ex-wife, Sarah Ferguson, we're simply being told that she will be making her own arrangements at this stage. But this is a big story, and like I say, I think that pressure just hadn't gone away following all the accusations, which he has constantly denied. But I think it's very telling in that statement from the palace that the king and queen wanted to make it clear that their thoughts and sympathies are always with victims and survivors of abuse. And I think that last sentence says it all, which is why the king has taken and made this huge step.
Laura, so you mentioned Beatrice and Eugenie. Apologies if you did mention her and I missed it, but what happens with Sarah Ferguson? Is that clear?
So all we understand is that in terms of her living arrangements, I mean, she announced when Andrew said he was no longer going to be using the title Duke of York, she wasn't going to be using the Duchess of York. She doesn't use it actually, but it is connected with her anyway. Assuming that dukedom is being removed from the peerage role, then she will no longer have any association with that title. In terms of where she lives, she's making her own arrangements. By that I read she won't be moving to the Sandringham estate with Andrew, but it's unclear where she will be. They have this unconventional arrangement where as ex-husband and wife they live in the same house but in different sort of wings of it. It's a large property, but that coexistence could well be coming to an end. What it means for their future, I'm not sure, but certainly in terms of the two daughters, Beatrice and Eugenie, they remain princesses. That isn't going away because of how those titles are awarded.
OK, Laura, thanks so much for giving us all that fresh information so quickly. Laura Badenoch, our royal correspondent there. Let's now turn to royal commentator Alistair Bruce, who joins us now. Alistair, Laura's given us a lot about the minutiae, about the nuts and bolts of this decision, but let's take a step back. You know the royal family well. How difficult a decision do you think this will have been for the king?
This has been something that's been growing for some time. The King is very aware that public opinion has been extremely clear. There is no love at the moment for the Duke of York as he was. He had become Prince Andrew already, and it is imperative that the King moved, and he has done tonight. And he's made it very clear that using whatever advice he's been given, he will see to it that Prince Andrew is cleared of all titles and styles. And the style, of course, was the fact that he was born a prince and called Royal Highness, but that will all be removed. And the King can do that through a letters patent. It is, after all, through the letters patent that when he was born, Andrew was given a princely title and was called Royal Highness. And it was then Elizabeth II who made him a duke, an earl, and a baron, 3 peerages, which have already been put into a place of disuse and now will be removed completely. And then, of course, he's been a Knight Companion of the Order of the Garter and a Knight Grand Cross of the Royal Victorian Order. Both of those are being expunged because the King can do that as sovereign of each of the orders in accordance with the statutes of those orders. But I think, you know, within the family, this issue, which the King has referred to, is so deeply marked by the King and Queen's abhorrence for what has happened to people and what they have suffered. And I think that the King is reacting in a way to deal with something that has been sat there for some time and which has come to its height, particularly following the publication of that book. And I think that it is wise of the King to have stopped and taken all the advice that he's got, and with the support, no doubt, of government and others, he has now made this decision, announced tonight, that all honours, titles and styles will be removed from his brother, who will just be called Mr. Andrew Mountbatten Windsor.
And Andrew, one thing that we know was an issue for the royal family was the fact that it was proving to be a distraction around the time that the King went to meet the Pope, and it was even a distraction this week when the King was visiting, I think it was Lincoln Cathedral, and there were people shouting from the crowds about it. There were lots of other people who were telling this person to shut up and to sing their hook, but it's not what the King wants to hear when he's on a walkabout, is it?
The King has a role to be a focus for national unity, and clearly this issue was getting in the way of that. And the initial move by the King to put the titles beyond use and the honours beyond use has been deemed by public reaction to be not sufficient. And I'm sure that however much a brother wants to look after a brother as a brother, it is quite clear that in the business of kingship, more needed to be done. And the King has now acted, and this is literally an expunging. It'll take some time, I've no doubt. But I imagine that as the announcement has been made, the King's Private Secretary, Sir Clive Alderton, will have prepared a very clear route to make sure that all style, title and honour that have been given to the King's brother will be removed. And it'll be done formally and in accordance with custom. And so that will take its time, as I say, but it is effectively, as of now, clear that the brother of the King will be an ordinary person without any form of exceptional name other than just his first name and his last name.
Alistair Bruce, thank you very much for the time being. Let's return to our royal correspondent, Laura Badenoch, who joins us over the phone now. And Laura, we talked to Alistair about how difficult this will have been for the King. Perhaps a less difficult decision in regards to younger members of the royal family. Specifically, I was thinking William and Catherine.
Yes, I think Prince William obviously is close to both of his cousins and will know that for Princesses Beatrice and Jayne, this will be an incredibly difficult time. Think of the family as you will, but they have always come across as this very close-knit family, like I said, with an unconventional living arrangement with both Andrew and Sarah Ferguson living in the same house. But that is how it's always been presented, that they are close to each other. And I think it has been hard for the family to have to put essentially the firm over family here. So for the King, to have to take this action against his own brother will have been a difficult one. It won't have been an easy decision, and I'm sure those discussions were not easy ones for the two brothers to have had. Certainly, I think there was a feeling, Andrew, when he a couple of weeks ago said he wouldn't be using those two titles, that perhaps this might die down, but it became clear that it simply wouldn't go away, which is why I think the King has sought the advice. He has spoken to the people who know about these things to see what would be the quickest and easiest way of removing all these titles and stars from his brother. We understood, there was one route through Parliament. It would require an act of Parliament, but there is an alternative method, which it seems is now being enacted. It is a formal process, but what the King is doing is asking the Lord Chancellor to remove the Duke of York from the peerage role, so it doesn't have to go through the Parliament in the same way as had been discussed, therefore not taking up valuable time in government. So by taking the Duke of York, the dukedom from the peerage role, that title can't be used officially. Now, as I said, but there is a real distinction here, because before Andrew said he wouldn't use the title, this means he won't have the title to use. So it is an incredible fall from grace. I think we just need to look at the man who was once a global ambassador, a business ambassador for Britain, jetting all around the world at one point. He was a decorated war hero. He saw action in the Falklands War. And yet here we are, the brother of the King, no longer even a prince, just Mr. Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, and it's from now basically that he will simply be known as Andrew Mountbatten Windsor.
Laura, thank you very much for that, for bringing us all the latest. If you're just joining us, let's just remind you of what's happened in the last half hour. Tonight, Buckingham Palace have released a statement. In it, they say, His Majesty has today initiated a formal process to remove the style, title and honours of Prince Andrew. Prince Andrew will now be known as Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. His lease on Royal Lodge has, to date, provided him with legal protection to continue in residence. Formal notice has now been served to surrender the lease, and he will move to alternative private accommodation. These censures are deemed necessary, notwithstanding the fact that he continues to deny the allegations against him. Their Majesties wish to make clear that their thoughts and utmost sympathies have been and will remain with the victims and survivors of any and all forms of abuse. Well, let's return to our political correspondent, John Craig, who is sitting next to me now. And John, we understand that the government was consulted about this and supports the decision that the King and Queen have made. As we were saying earlier, the Prime Minister and the King will have discussed this at the weekly audience. I was interested just listening to that statement once again. They referred to the fact that Andrew denies these allegations. So they're taking this action even though he denies the allegations. Clearly, they've decided enough is enough, the shame he's brought on the royal family. But clearly the government will, even if they don't want to go down the route of complicated legislation in Parliament, I'm sure there'll have to be some sort of acknowledgement in Parliament, some sort of parliamentary process here, because after all, we've just been talking about peerages, haven't we, and the House of Lords and so on. I would have thought the Prime Minister will have had probably quite a lot of discussions with the King about this, possibly other senior politicians as well. I mean, I think perhaps David Lammy, the Deputy Prime Minister, who is also Secretary of State for Justice and Lord Chancellor, I think he may well have a role in this, because I think the Lord you may know better than me about this, but I think doesn't the Lord Chancellor have a role in stripping people of peerages? I think we're just going to bring in Molly Malone. Our correspondent.
It's exactly as John says. The Dukedom of York is a peerage, so the King is basically using his powers at speed, but via the Lord Chancellor, essentially sending what's known as royal warrants to the Lord Chancellor to secure the removal. Rather, I think in this case, than having to use an Act of Parliament, the Palace's view is very much that Parliament has urgent national issues to address and to deal with. So this is seemingly how they're handling it in this case, rather than taking up sort of precious parliamentary time, the king clearly moving at speed to use the powers that he has. As you say, there was a very visual reminder earlier in the week of the continued controversy that he was bringing in terms of the heckling that the king was experiencing. And I think that really, for the first time, we saw quite vividly, you know, the pain and that it's causing the institution and the royal family.
We've just had in the last few moments word from the leader of the Liberal Democrats, Sir Ed Davey. He's backed the King's decision to remove Andrew's title. He says the King is absolutely right to strip Prince Andrew of both his titles and his residence at Royal Lodge. It's clear that Andrew's position had become totally untenable, having disgraced his office and embarrassed the country. This is an important step towards rebuilding trust in our institutions and drawing a line under this whole sorry saga. Well, let's talk now to former royal correspondent and long-time royal watcher, Jenny Bond, who joins us now. Jenny, what do you make of what's been announced in the last half an hour or so?
Well, I have just walked into the house and heard this news, and I am pretty astonished, I have to say. This is the strongest action against a member of the royal family that I know of. And I think that the king is acting very much here in harmony with public opinion, media opinion, and parliamentary opinion. I think when we have those three forces lined up together, and I've never seen as much criticism of a member of the royal family as we've had of Andrew, even to the point that, you know, over last weekend, I was feeling a touch uneasy about being part of that pylon on Andrew, wondering just how far it could go. So I am very glad, actually, that the king has taken this action now, has put a most decisive line under it and between him and his brother. It must have been an extraordinarily difficult decision, but it is the correct decision. And I think it is significant that in the statement, the King and the Queen point to the victims of the abuse, and that's what they want this to be about, more than the reputation of the royal family. But by doing this, they have alleviated some of the damage that's been done.
And placing the victims centre is something that Prince Andrew seemed unable to do himself. There was very little contrition of his friendship with Epstein in all of those interviews that he gave and the comments that he made on the subject.
Time and again, yes, he's had the opportunity to express sympathy, had the opportunity to do something, as he did say in the Newsnight interview he would. I know that as part of the settlement, there was a donation, a hefty donation, I think, to Virginia Giuffre's charity, her foundation. But nevertheless, he should have done more, and he certainly has paid the price. It's extraordinary to think that he's no longer going to be a prince, and that's going to hurt him. He's a man who believes very highly in the trappings of royalty, has enjoyed the trappings of royalty, and is very hot on status. And I'm afraid his arrogance has just brought him down. And he is utterly disgraced now. And I can't see, can you see how the family will ever welcome him back to any events? I really don't know. It will be a long time, I think, before we see him with other members of the family. And I imagine he is very bitter.
And the mention of the arrogance being part of his downfall, that is clear, isn't it, in terms of the fact that I think people are often able to forgive people who've made mistakes if there is contrition. But there didn't appear to be a great deal of contrition there.
No, there has been none, and he has had the opportunity to do that. He's been holed up in Royal Lodge for so long now that we haven't heard much from him at all or seen him very much. So it's difficult to know what's been going on. And we understand that his wife, Sarah Ferguson, has been utterly distraught by this because she too has been brought down by this. You just can't have two people like this, proven liars, as senior members of the royal family, or really any part of the royal family. I suppose they always will be part of the family, but how close that family can ever be again, I don't know. I think William will be very relieved by this. I don't know exactly what part he's been playing in it, but I think he has been pushing for decisive action in a monarchy that he is going to be taking over and which he wants to be proud of.
Yet it does seem that there will be some kind of appropriate private provision from the king, it is understood. So, you know, however bad relations are, the king now seems to understand that it's going to be up to him to look after Andrew, and that money can't come from Crown money, it can't come from the public purse?
No, because there was a genuine public interest here about Royal Lodge being part of the Crown estate. It does need to be let out if it's going to be let out, or at a commercial rent, and that does not appear to have been the case by any means over the past 22 years, because the vast part of the profits from the Crown estate go back to the Treasury and therefore fund the things that taxpayers need funded. So there is a public interest here. So he'll be housed privately on the Sandringham estate. There's a very nice farmhouse there, very nice indeed. He'll probably be there, I should think. It's not very far from Sandringham House itself. And maybe in the fullness of time, he will be invited to join the family for very, very private gatherings such as Christmas. I don't know. This is uncharted territory.
And what about Sarah Ferguson and the children, Beatrice and Eugenie?
Well, for the girls, as they're known amongst the royals, it seems clear, well, it is stated that they will keep their titles. It is a very close family. It's going to be enormously hurtful for all of them, obviously, and difficult for all of them, but I think they will remain loyal to their parents. Sarah Ferguson, I don't know where she's going to go. I've always thought that they would go hand in hand into whichever oblivion they were going into. But it seems that there are reports that she wants to go her own way, or they want to go their own way. I don't know. But look, they're grown people. They're grown-ups. They have plenty of money by any normal standards, and they should be able to stand on their own 2 feet. I mean, Andrew really shouldn't need his big brother to look after him financially or in any other way, and neither should Sarah expect that her ex-brother-in-law should fund her way of life.
I guess that some would argue it'd be pretty tricky for them to go out and get normal jobs.
Yes, probably would be, but I cannot imagine they don't have the funds to manage some kind of existence I mean, they don't need vast mansions, do they? They can just have, 4 or 5 bedroom, 2 bedrooms houses, actually, probably would be fine. I've said publicly before, perhaps Andrew, who will get £500,000 under the terms of the Crown Estate lease in reparation for the money he shelled out for the renovation of Royal Lodge. I mean, £500,000, that might buy you a little place in Woking, for example, nice line in pizzas there. So who knows?
Being mischievous. We like it, though. Jenny Bond, thank you very much for joining us. Well, if you're just tuning in, let's just remind you of the statement that Buckingham Palace have released this evening. They say, His Majesty has today initiated a formal process to remove the style, title and honours of Prince Andrew. Prince Andrew will now be known as Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. His lease on the Royal Lodge has to date provided him with legal protection to continue in residence. Formal notice has now been served to surrender the lease, and he will move to alternative private accommodation. These censures are deemed necessary, notwithstanding the fact that he continues to deny the allegations against him. Their Majesties wish to make clear that their thoughts and utmost sympathies have been and will remain with the victims and survivors of any and all forms of abuse. Well, let's return to our panel, who are joining us here in the Studio for Politics Hub, expecting to be talking about Rachel Reeves and her housing woes, Guito Harry, formerly from Inside Number 10, and Ava Evans from Politics Joe. Guito, Jenny was talking about Prince Andrew's personality and how much of a problem do you think that has been in his downfall? No sort of public sense of horror or outrage at actually what was revealed about Epstein, and no sense of humility about it.
I met him a couple of times a long time ago, and he turns up and he's quite affable in a way that a man educated beyond his intellect can be, and a man without really a proper job, but, seems to be part of the furniture and certain working assumptions. Nothing sort of really offensive about him, but we didn't know then of the associations. And I think what has happened over the years, and there's mounting evidence of this, is that he has really milked that situation for personal gratification, at a financial level to a certain extent, but certainly at other levels as well, that has left people feeling very distasteful, to say the least. I think what's striking tonight, there's not going to be anyone in Parliament who's going to say he's been hard done by. There's not going to be dissent about this. Everyone's going to support what the King has done. But what might happen is some people might not think it's enough. Even this is enough, because humiliated though he is, all of this presupposes there's a working assumption at the heart of what we're talking about tonight, that he has done something wrong. And that wrong is an association, to put it gently, with a notorious paedophile. And there may be some people who say, now that he is an ordinary citizen, if he really is an ordinary citizen, I know what would happen to me if I had associations with Jeffrey Epstein, and a whole lot of files are being released across the Atlantic, some more files about to be released, we expect, in a few weeks when a few moves have taken in the States. Is he genuinely a private citizen, as vulnerable as the rest of us are to inquiries and investigations and criminal investigations now? That will be the next test, I think. So much as this should be a full stop for the monarchy, it certainly sort of disassociates them from him. I'm not sure the pain is over for him, Andrew, yet.
Ava, I mean, the royal family clearly see him as an enormous embarrassment. Do you think for us as a country he's an embarrassment internationally, or do you think this is something that is just something that us in the UK are quite focused on?
I think well, as a country, I think we're very lucky that the current president of the United States was also pictured with Epstein on various occasions, because had he not been, then perhaps we might have been punished more fervently than we have actually been. But it's an enormous embarrassment on the world stage, particularly when you look at, negotiating with other countries. The monarchy, the only real sell is that they are soft power for us. They're supposed to be sort of, the whiter than white. They're supposed to be the attraction to come to visit the United Kingdom. And then, this behaviour is so appalling and abominable. It's not really like you want to go round to other countries and hand out mugs with his face on it, do you, right now? He's not exactly a prize to be dishing out.
Gita, was he ever useful? I mean, in terms of international trade and going and schmoozing and pressing the flesh. I mean, as you said, an affable fellow. He was clearly perhaps playing to some strengths there in going and schmoozing with a lot of businessmen and saying, come and invest in the UK. Yeah,
I think to be fair with him, there is a sort of cachet to being a member of the British royal family, and it doesn't work everywhere. But there are large parts of the world where that thing carries a certain weight, and people are excited about proximity to a sort of member of the royal family. And to be fair with him, he cut fairly, I don't want to over-exaggerated, but he, as a young man, cut a fairly dashing figure. He genuinely was, I think, pretty heroic in the Falklands War. And so this young prince rocks up, somewhere else in the world.
But she's a great deal younger than you and I,
well,
Gito.
she probably doesn't remember him.
This was a man who,
when he was your age.
I was more of a William, I think.
He did date a string of incredibly glamorous women, and he was in the tabloids. I mean, in the 80s.
And people are fascinated by royalty. I mean, if we really are honest about them, they're one of the most dysfunctional families in modern Britain. If you just look at the level of divorce and, brothers not talking to brothers and,
Isn't that just very normal?
Nobody's held down a proper job and the kids live at home with their parents and they're all living on benefits. I mean, really, you could describe the royal family as the most dysfunctional in a hotly contested field in modern Britain. But they are also, a big asset. And I speak as somebody who thinks that the idea in theory and philosophically is ludicrous, but I have seen firsthand, the late Queen in particular, what a draw she has been and what an asset she has been to this very odd setup that we have constitutionally in the UK. So there was a time when Andrew was, a kind of draw that people who might not turn up to meet some sort of career civil servant who rocked up in Abu Dhabi wanting to meet investors, but if there was a chance to meet Prince Andrew and shake hands with royalty, and there weren't selfies back then, Eva, but have your picture taken with him, and sent to you weeks later when it had been printed off on a copier in Buckingham Palace or whatever, then that was a draw. And that did mean, I think, that certain deals were struck and certain investments came to the UK. And in that sense, he proved valuable. What people say is that he also took advantage of that very, very personally for personal gratification and financial benefit.
I think there was a time, certainly, going on from what Gitas is saying, when he was regarded as very useful by British prime ministers. I can remember going back to when Gordon Brown was prime minister. I remember going to an event where he was, at the time when he was a trade envoy, and clearly the government at the time found him very useful in trade deals and so on. I also remember being in Gibraltar when I think there was a vacancy for governor, and I think the locals there wanted Prince Andrew as their governor. That's because of his naval background, helicopters and all that, Falklands War. So he was at one time regarded as an asset before the scandal. You mentioned before about him being a war hero of the Falklands and so on. Before his spectacular fall from grace, he was regarded as an asset.
Yeah, indeed. Let's return to Alistair Bruce, Sky's royal commentator, who's rejoining us now. And Alistair, will the King be hoping that this puts an end to the controversy around Andrew? I mean, whether or not it does is a different matter, I suppose.
This is radical action by the King, and he will have taken a great deal of advice. I'm sure that the government wants this matter to be seen by the nation to have been addressed. And clearly the decision by the King that the former Duke of York would leave his titles to one side is not sufficient. And that has clearly not dealt with the issue as far as public opinion is concerned. And so the King has acted radically today with the advice of those who know the law about dealing with peerages, which are by nature quite difficult to remove and extinguish. But he has been given a clear route and he has acted. And therefore, from now, it is just Mr. Andrew Mountbatten Windsor who we're talking about. And he once held a dukedom, an earldom, a barony, and much else besides. And that has all now been put into train to be completely expunged, to literally cease to exist. And that is quite radical in historical terms, but it does mean, I think, for the King, that the business of being the deep keel of the nation, which is what the sovereign seeks to be, not only for the United Kingdom, but for the other nations of which he is king, and also his role as head of the Commonwealth, has been entirely distracted. And it's been a steady beat in the royal story for a long time. I don't believe it will cease to be present, but I think the clear evidence that the King now has taken away all that was given to Andrew as a result of being the Queen's son. The fact that he's now done that, I think, must at least be clear as an expression of determination by the King that this should be divided away from his role as head of state. But of course, at the same time, the King is a brother. And within families, it can be a complicated place. But in addition to that, the King completely accepts that Andrew Mountbatten Windsor has made it very clear that he contests the allegations that are made against him, and that he has always done so. And in the King acting, and in that his brother is going along with it, I think we are seeing, I hope for the King, a turning of the page and a sign to the public that the King has taken this very seriously as he can.
Alistair, how do you think Prince Andrew will be feeling today? Well, no longer Prince Andrew, is he? Andrew Mountbatten Windsor.
Well, I would imagine this is a significant element of what he had been. After all, he was born to Elizabeth II. He was born to a queen, whereas his elder brother and sister had not been. And so from the moment of his birth, he has been part of this family. He continues to be part of the family. And much was required of him, and people have their views over whether he contributed or didn't, whether he did the jobs that he was given well or badly, and I'm sure that might go on. But as far as his mother was concerned, he was an integral part of what she was seeking to do as head of state. But, you know, this story encompasses so much public opinion, and it is imperative that the King has acted, bearing in mind that, you know, what matters is that he, as head of state, must be supported by members of his family who are able to work and contribute. Here, clearly, his brother Andrew no longer can. And I'm sure for his brother Andrew, who's been out of the public sphere for quite a long time, although he has appeared with members of the family, and that in itself has been deemed as controversial. We're not going to see him again at any of these events. He is always going to be the brother of the King. He is always going to be part of the family. And Andrew's two daughters will continue to be princesses, although they don't do public duties. But in the end, this will be a significant change for Andrew and a challenge for him to take on, not least losing all of these elements that came to him with birth and with marriage, but also the fact that he's moving from the house that became his at an important point in his life and in which he has lived for most of his married life.
Alistair, thank you very much for that. We talked a little bit earlier about the impact it was having on the King's manoeuvres throughout the week. This was the embarrassment that was causing the King. It was a little bit apparent earlier when he was heckled on a visit in Lincolnshire to the cathedral. Let's have a little listen to that.
How long have you known about Andrew and Epstein? Have you asked the police to cover up?
For making that noise, the King then just moves on to, past those members. Let's bring in the historian, Sir Anthony Selden, now, who joins us. Anthony, very good to get your thoughts today. Alistair Bruce there talking about this being radical and historical from the King. What's your judgment on how historic, how significant this is?
Well, it's very significant, isn't it? I mean, it's incredibly radical and it's without historical precedent. And I think a regret is that in some ways it's similar to the abdication crisis of 1936. Obviously, a monarch of the monarchy felt he couldn't carry on doing his job, but it was the monarch themselves who withdrew. And here it looks very strongly like Andrew was pushed. And it was open to Andrew on numerous occasions to voluntarily absent himself and avoid the embarrassment. You cannot have a monarchy, two significant royals, including him, unwell. So they're fighting hard to work for all that's best in Britain. For charity, for caring for other people, for service, for dignity, for help for others, and have somebody whose allegations against them are so utterly abhorrent and antithetical to everything that the monarchy is wanting to convey. So I think it's inevitable. I think it's the right thing for the monarch to do, and I think I agree with Alistair that I think now, I'm sure, look, some people are going to carry on saying more and more should have happened, but it's very hard to think what more decisive action the monarch and the monarchy could have taken. I think I'd also say that I don't think that the monarchy itself is particularly suffering from this. I think people have priced in, as you were saying, for many years, Andrew has had question marks over him. Now he denies some or all of those allegations, but people have priced in that Andrew was not a positive and in tune member of the royal family with all the values of service rather than entitlement, service that the royal family stand for. So people have priced it in. So I don't think it's going to have had a particularly significantly negative effect on the royal family, but it was just very unwelcome noise that looked as if it was going to go on and on and on. So yes, he's done the right thing. Yes, I think that Andrew could have fallen on his sword, would have done himself a lot of good if he'd done that, but he didn't choose that option.
I mean, constitutionally, Anthony, in terms of where he is in line to the throne, this doesn't make a difference, does it? Because he's so far down.
He is now far down. He wasn't earlier on, but before the young prince and princess were born, but now he's a long way down. I think it looks like a very big thing, but in terms of the royal family, which has been in existence for the monarchy for 900 and more years, I don't think that it was significantly impacting. It was very big. It was very big negative story, very unwelcome noise, very distracting, very, very discordant with all those messages of everything that the royal family is standing for, of nationhood and service and goodness and compassion. To have this very unwelcome noise with all these appalling allegations. So to be cut of all of that, I think is completely inevitable and completely the right thing for the King to have done.
That's Anthony Selden, historian and constitutional expert. Very good to talk to you tonight. So Politics Hub, not quite the normal politics tonight. We've been bringing you this breaking news that the King has begun the formal process to strip the titles from Prince Andrew, who is going to move out of his Windsor home to Sandringham. Thank you so much to my guests, Skeeter Harry and Ava Evans, for gamely talking about Prince Andrew when they came here to talk about Rachel Reeves. We're going to bring you continuing coverage of this breaking news story throughout the evening here on Sky News. Sarah Jane Mee is joining you next. Stay with us on Sky News.